Hello, and welcome to today's discussion on Janet Emig's Writing as a Mode of Learning and Linda Flower and John R. Hayes' A Cognitive Process Theory of Writing. I will briefly summarize each work and then provide a commentary concerning both works. I'll give precedence to Janet Emig because she published first. She published in 1977, and Flower and Hayes published in 1981. Since Janet Emig's work predates Flower and Hayes by 4 years, let us begin with Writing as a Mode of Learning. Emig begins by mentioning cognitive studies conducted by theorists such as Levi, Vygotsky, A.R. Luria, and Jerome Bruner that conclude that higher cognitive functions such as analysis and synthesis seem to develop most fully with the support system of verbal language, particularly, it seems, of written languages. These studies conclude that speaking and hearing are first-order or natural processes, while reading and writing are considered second-order processes that, and I quote here, must be learned initially only with the aid of formal and systematic instruction, unquote. While talking and writing are both considered productive cognitive functions, Emig argues that talking and writing may emanate from different organic sources and represent quite different, possibly distinct, language functions. To further argue the distinctions between writing and talking, she gives us an 11-point list. She tells us, number 1, writing is a learned behavior, while talking is natural. Number 2, writing is an artificial process, talking is not. Number 3, writing is a technological device. Not necessarily the wheel or jet engine, but it is a technical device as it is. Most writing is slower than talking. Number 5, writing is stark, barren, even naked as a medium. Talking is rich, luxuriant, inherently redundant. Talk leans on the environment. Writing must provide its own context. Number 7, with writing, the audience is usually absent. With talking, the listener is usually present. Number 8, writing usually results in a visible graphic product. Talking usually does not. Number 9, perhaps there is a product involved. Writing tends to be a more responsible and committed act than talking. It can be said that throughout history, an aura, an ambience if you like, a mystique has usually encircled the written word. The spoken word has for the most part proved ephemeral and treated mundanely. And number 11, she says, because writing is often our representation of the world made visible, embodying both process and product, writing is more readily a form and source of learning than talking. She asserts that writing utilizes the Emig asserts that writing utilizes the inactive, iconic, and symbolic methods that we humans employ in dealing with reality. She also asserts that writing is the graphic embodiment of John Dewey and Jean Piaget's definition of learning as the reorganization or confirmation of a cognitive scheme in light of an experience. She states that writing is epigenetic, with the complex evolutionary development of thought steadily and graphically visible and available throughout as a record of the journey, from jottings and notes to full discursive formulations. So that, in other words, is complete. Now let us segue into Flower and Hayes, A Cognitive Process of Writing, published in 1981. It's an interesting note. If Flower and Hayes took 5 years to conduct their study, and of course then they published it into those 5 years, then they started in 1976, a year prior to Emig's publishing of her article we just discussed, where she poses a great difference between talking and writing. All right, so knowing that, now that says they wouldn't know that she made such a distinguishment between talking and writing. Now they would have known by the time they published their works, but when they started, they set up these parameters. But let's say that, let's just make sure we're saying that Flowers and Hayes are not ignoring Janet Emig's work, making a distinction, but their study had already started. So while Emig argued that speaking is a completely different cognitive function than writing, Flower and Hayes chose to equate speech to writing in their study. And they studied writers for 5 years. These test subjects were given a specific topic on which to write a paper. And then they were also instructed to verbalize every thought into a microphone throughout this entire composition session. In other words, every random thought, whatever it was, speak it. Then also they collected their notes and pre-writings and finished products of each student. Like I said, numerous students over the course of 5 years. And they came up with some determinations based on cognitive psychology, cognitive neuroscience as premises. And so what they have is they comprise a theory. It's a cognitive process theory of writing, and it hinges on these 4 points. Number 1, the process of writing is best understood as a set of distinctive thinking processes that writers orchestrate or organize during the act of composing. Number 2, these processes have a hierarchical, highly embedded organization into which any given process can be embedded within any other. In other words, one process can supersede another, vice versa, and it's interchangeable. So even though it's hierarchical, it's not necessarily linear. It's by all means not linear. It's very convoluted. Number 3, the act of composing itself is a goal-directed thinking process guided by the writer's own growing network of goals. And number 4 is that writers create their own goals in 2 ways: by generating both high-level goals and supporting sub-goals, which embody the writer's developing sense of purpose. And then, at all times, by changing major goal, and then at times, by changing major goals or even establishing entirely new ones based on what has been learned in the act of writing. In a nutshell, Flower and Hayes mode consists of, number 1, this mode of cognitive function. It's the writer's long-term memory, and it consists of the topical knowledge, audience awareness, writing plans, so forth. Number 2, the writing process, which consists of planning, translating, and reviewing. And then number 3, they call the task environment, and that consists of the rhetorical problem and the written text, the actual composed written text. Each component may have some subcomponents depending on the writer. Now, so we have Flower and Hayes telling us that writing is a complex cognitive function composed of 3 major components: task environment, writer's short or long-term memory, and the writing process, which is recursive, process-centered, in line with cognitive thinking, so that writing is learning. These argue the importance of the learning functions within composition studies, freshman composition classes. So while Flower and Hayes included talking into theirs, while Emig, made such a distinction, they still really complement one another in determining who are better in determining pause. So, what do we take from all this? Well, first of all, we had Janet Emig arguing the importance of writing and its tremendous function within higher cognitive function. Well, then you have Flower and Hayes who extend that into a 5-year study, basically saying the same thing, even though it is inclusive of talking, which that is problematic. Who's to say that some of the talking wasn't contrived to perform? So it's not. This is not lab science. This is kind of a sociological experiment inside a composition class or composition environment. But it's it's that empirical way of examining writing and just determining once and for all that it's not a linear process. It's not start to finish. It's a convoluted recursive process that you know is repetitive and repetitive. Um, it's fair to say that most composition classrooms are directly influenced by the um, findings and presentations of Janet Emig and Linda Flower and John R. Hayes, as well as the cognitive theorists that we've been discussing. I hope you enjoyed my little broadcast, and I will see you in class.